So good evening. On behalf of the Indian Futures, I'm extremely delighted to welcome you all to our panel discussion with the India Habitat Center, which is a series now. We are doing it every month. And this is on, as you all can see, on US presidential elections 2024, domestic choices, international consequences. And we really have assembled a star cast who can really help us navigate through the intense fog that seems to have engulfed the US and also the world on what would really be possible after the elections. Let me begin by introducing the speakers, and obviously we start with Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee, who is the president of the India Habitat Center, a very illustrious diplomat and an author of international repute. Her volumes, in fact, have been blockbuster hits and are and she lectures profusely, writes, and is on all over media. Her views are sought instantly. Thank you, ma'am. Truly an honor to have you chair this session. We are equally excited to have with us Shri Baijayant Panda, who is an extremely well-known political figure at the national, international level. He, in fact, is now the member of Parliament, Lok Sabha, and also has been in the Rajya Sabha earlier, and also written a fantastic book, Maverick. Yes. Lutyens Maverick. So please do read if you haven't. Thank you, sir. And he has been a constant source of inspiration and guidance to the Indian Futures, and has guided us and has spoken with us on earlier occasions too, especially in JNU, where I come from. I'm equally excited to have Professor Chintamani Mahapatra, whom I've known for decades now. He retired as a professor in the Center for American Studies, and is really one of the foremost scholars on American studies in the country, known globally. He is also now the founder-chairperson of the Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. Thank you, sir. It's truly an honor to have you with us. Also, he has spoken with us earlier also in JNU. I'm equally delighted, in fact, to have Shri Ashok Malik, who is the partner and chair of the Asia Group. A very, I would really, put him at a very high level in terms of very original thinking on national and international politics. It's great to have you, Ashokji, with us again today. Thank you, you all, for taking time out. Let me just very briefly, in fact, lay down some key questions we are looking at, and obviously it's a battle of Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. And I think what we are looking at is, especially from the Indian point of view, for example, Trump, he's seen increasingly as the instinctive, the unpredictable, at times breaking US establishment orthodoxies. Is that a good thing for India and the world? Harris, again, the ideological liberal, but also risk-averse and predictable, easy to read. I think, what are the choices which obviously the US society, the US electorate has to vote on, but I think they do have important consequences for India and the world. So the quick, I was also talking to Ashokji, and he suggested, Manish, why don't you identify some key questions you want us to really look at at a deeper level. So I think, and I thought that was an excellent way of really getting the conversation going. What sort of key domestic ideological and political positions, for example, immigration, economy, abortion rights, gun control, and climate change, are going to decide the future of, who is going to win. Also the role of swing states. Again, what would be the structures of governance? Obviously, looking at the national and at the international level. Is it going to be the next government, the next administration going to be establishment or anti-establishment? Obviously, when I'm talking about anti-establishment, it is going to be about Trump. World views of Trump versus Harris. Also, a very important, how are they looking at Israel? How are they looking at China? How are they looking at Russia? I think these views are They're not similar, they are fundamentally divergent, and to what extent are they in fact going to shape the outcomes of the ongoing conflicts in Europe, in Middle East. So I think let me stop here and now invite Ambassador Bhaswati Mukherjee to present her chair's remarks. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you very much, and welcome to this interesting debate which we are going to have, and with this very distinguished panel of speakers. I just wanted to make a few points as to why this debate is important for us here. Otherwise, one could well ask the question that it's a domestic election, how does it affect India? It affects India because India has become, over the years, and in particular after the nuclear pact, one of the strongest strategic partners of the United States, a partnership that cuts across the US domestic political divide. But at the same time, what complicates the issue are conflicts which at the moment are bringing the clouds of war over European skies, but which would have implications for us depending on which way the new American president goes. There are many who say that Trump is a maverick, to quote the book written by our key speaker. But the question here arises, is Trump better for India or not? What does Trump bring to the table? What did Trump do in his presidency which was of direct benefit to India in contrast to the Biden presidency? Or, to put it more simply, was Biden able to control those elements of the US State Department at the middle and lower level which continue to be fixated with Pakistan against India? Would a Trump presidency be able to reverse that? On the other hand, you have Kamala Harris. She's an enigma. She talks about her being black. She talks about being proud of her black roots. At the same time, she talks about enjoying idli and dosha. But the point is, India's foreign policy cannot be moved around because of the food habits of an individual. What will the Kamala Harris presidency bring to India is the crucial question we need to ask ourselves today. Will it be better for India? Will Kamala Harris be able to have better control over the State Department? Or is Kamala Harris a pale shadow of her present boss, Joe Biden, and therefore we could imagine a limp American presidency limping on, not for one term, but perhaps for 2 terms? These are issues we need to ask ourselves. We also need to ask ourselves that at a time when the West is practicing double standards, let's say, as far as extrajudicial assassinations are concerned, the West can go after Osama bin Laden, kill him in Pakistan, and announce it. The other Western powers can boast about taking out targets in specific countries. But without any proof, they can accuse India of doing extrajudicial killings, which means that they have a concept of international law which is two-faced, one for the powerful and one for the less powerful. In that context, is a Trump presidency better for India, or is Kamala Harris better for India? I leave you all to debate these issues, and I request our keynote speaker. We're very honored to have him here, and he has a time constraint to illuminate us with his perspective on the issue.
Professor Dabhade, chair for this very interesting discussion, Ambassador Mukherjee, Professor Mahapatra, my friend Ashok, Malik, distinguished delegates. This is indeed a very interesting and timely discussion, considering the election is just about a week away. Right at the outset, I want to be very clear that our position is, ought to be, not just the government's position, but those of us in the polity who are engaged with foreign policy on a regular basis and take stands on it. Our stand is that this is a decision for the Americans to make. And whoever is elected president is somebody that we will be very happy to deal with. This is not just our public position. I've been, in the last few months, I've been asked this question literally hundreds of times by foreign diplomats, by journalists, by people generally just interested in politics. And I tell them that this is my private position as well. And the reason for that is, we are a different India today. Bharat today has transitioned from decades of diffidence in a post-colonial era into an era of confidence. Our confidence is seen around the world as our companies, which were once scared of competition, take on the rest of the world. It is seen in our diaspora, which is the largest in the world and arguably the most successful and affluent in virtually every country, and cherished and celebrated by them in every society. Our confidence is seen in the acceptance of India as a rising economic superpower. I've experienced this personally over 24 years in Parliament, during which I have led more than 50 Indian parliamentary delegations to track two discussions around the world, and also been a member in a few dozen more. With 2 or 3 exceptions, and you can figure out which those countries are, the vast majority of the world welcomes India. Yes, a Democratic or a Republican president, especially the 2 candidates who are today fighting it out, will of course have some differences in policy. But the point I'm trying to make is that this new India is capable of furthering our national interest in a manner that is friendly and yet is also assertive in its own way. There were many, many years, many, many decades when we used to have a feeling that unless we had a friendly administration, and sometimes we used to think that one party in the US White House was maybe better for us than the other party, we have moved on from that. Now, both these candidates have a track record. President Trump already has had a term, so he's got more of a track record. Vice President Harris has been in the spotlight for 3.5 years. And we've seen her on the campaign trail for 2-3 months now. We can extrapolate from that what it might mean. There will be some differences. There will astonishingly be some similarities. You've seen on many issues, Vice President Harris has taken a stand very similar to what President Trump has said. For example, this is a domestic issue, but it's a very evocative issue of removing taxes on tips, which affects huge numbers of Americans who have suffered higher than usual inflation. You see what appears to be different policy in terms of the Middle East, in terms of what's happening in Israel and with Iran. Yes, there are some differences, certainly, but my educated bet would be that the differences are not as vast as one might surmise from reading the news cycle. It's not as if the US under a democratic administration is going to abandon Israel. The Democratic candidate has a base that she has to keep motivated. We are seeing a rather unusual challenge where typically people that would be expected to vote for her, some of them, are taking a stand on the Israel-Palestine issue, which is very intriguingly taking a stand in favor of Trump. One of the more surprising things that I saw was a Muslim mayor in Detroit supporting Trump openly. And this was not something that, just from the reading of the headlines, you would have been able to predict. Now, when it comes to Indian policy, there has been dramatic changes in the last 2.5, 3 decades. I would say that the low point in the relationship was when we had sanctions after our nuclear tests. And thereafter, successively, through various administrations, the relationship has only got stronger on both sides. The dehyphenation that took place with Pakistan was very real. Yes, it's true, as Ambassador Mukherjee pointed out, that there are still vestiges of the US system which go back to an atavistic stand that they've taken from the Cold War times. I remember 20 years ago when the civil nuclear deal was at its peak, and I and my colleagues in Parliament from many different parties had many dozens of interactions with our counterparts on the Hill, in the Pentagon and State, and also when they visited here. There was this immense resistance, within the Indian establishment as well. There was resistance, but there was an immense resistance from those in the US system who were called the ayatollahs of the nuclear deterrence policy that had existed for so many decades. And that was simply that India had missed the bus when the line in the sand was drawn for the nuclear club, and that was that. The reality was that you simply couldn't ignore India, which had, despite not being a member of the nuclear club, very scrupulously adhered to non-proliferation principles. We were only the second country, other than the US, that had actually intercepted ships on the high seas to stop proliferation. And we've come a long way in these last 20 years. For now, several years, we've been the fastest growing economy. There is no country in the world that can ignore the effect that India has on the global economy. We are one of the major engines now of the global economy. And this has come at a time after 4 decades of history-making Chinese growth. The growth that the Chinese experienced for more than 3 decades was something that humankind had never seen in history. Such phenomenal growth over such a short period of time. But historically, India and China have waxed and waned in terms of their economic size. And we have a slower time of getting to a point where there is explosive growth. In China, of course, the leader has to carry just 4 other colleagues with him out of the 9 people that lead the country to make major policy decisions. Our national leader has to carry at least 400 million people. But that doesn't necessarily make us weaker. It just takes time to get to what is these days called the tipping point. And we've clearly reached that tipping point some years ago. In 2016, I won a couple of bets with people that study geopolitics very closely by betting that Donald Trump would win. And this was against the conventional wisdom. And the reason was, that year in September, I had spent 3 weeks in the US on a speaking tour, coast to coast. And I sort of ignored what was happening on the coasts. And I talked to a lot of people in the Midwest and other places where I had myself studied as a student. And it became overwhelmingly clear that he was going to win. I lost a similar bet in 2020, but it was very narrow. If you remember, on the night of election day, late into the night, Trump was leading. And only when the count extended overnight, then he started losing some states in the next morning. Now, this is also an extraordinarily close fight. What has happened with the change of the candidate on the Democratic side is extraordinary. And the 2 candidates' fortunes have waxed and waned. The latest polls seem to indicate Trump has a slight edge, but they're essentially tied because it's within the margin of error. More importantly than being tied in the national race is that in the 7 swing states, Trump seems to be leading in at least 6, perhaps all 7 now. But they are, again, very small margins. The Indian diaspora has continued to play a very important part, not just as being the most affluent group in the nation, in the US, but also having increasingly got involved in policy and politics. I remember 24 years ago, you would see very few Indian Americans in politics or on staff of senators and congressmen and women. Today, you can't go 50 feet without bumping into one, and many have gone into active politics. Now, this may not necessarily lead to certain conclusions that one might draw superficially. It's not necessary that somebody of Indian American origin in American politics is necessarily going to take a political stand that is aligned with what India is taking. And that's okay, that's normal. So as I come to making my final remarks, I would like to say this. Clearly, many people are expecting that this is a watershed election. Somebody like Heather Conley of the German Marshall Fund has commented that it feels like the world has taken a deep breath and is holding its breath, waiting for the election results to come out and for decisions to start happening. Brookings has said, and this is with reference to India actually, that key areas that might be impacted would be Indo-Pacific policy, general approach to China, cooperation on insecurity, economy, technology, and visas. And as I said in the beginning, and as I reiterate now, yes, certainly there will be differences between a Republican and a Democratic administration, and especially between these two, because these two represent more or less the sort of more towards the extreme ideological stands that both groups have represented. But it is not as if the world will be upended. It is not as if US will view India from an entirely different prism or vice versa. And it is not as if the US's China policy will be that hugely different. Yes, there may be differences in tariffs. There may be differences in, there may be some showdowns indeed, depending on who's in office. I expect one of the bigger areas where there might be a change of policy would be with relation to Ukraine, because Trump has been officially talking about his mystery formula for getting both sides to the discussion table, whereas the Democratic side has never actually supported that. So this is one of the areas where you might see a difference. So once again, in conclusion, I wish you all a very engaging discussion. I'll be there for part of it. Unfortunately, I have certain other compulsions. I'm in charge of my party's campaign for the Delhi elections, and so we are working very late. I will have to leave before the conclusion of this session. But I would be intrigued to hear some of the comments that you have. There will be nuances as to what the policies might be, where it might impact India, in what way. But ultimately, we have the confidence today to deal with whichever administration there is in the US in a manner that furthers our national interest. Thank you.
Thank you very much for these illuminating remarks. And I completely agree with you that India in 2024 is vastly different from the India you were referring to. And we have the confidence as an emerged power to deal with whichever contender wins in the domestic process. But naturally, because of the polarized nature of the debate, the interest is much more. And therefore, the curiosity of the man and woman on the street in India, because we've also become much more politically conscious because of the importance of the partnership as to what it could possibly mean for India. So I share your perception. I feel sorry you have to leave. I hope you'll be able to stay for at least another 10 minutes. And I would.
May I take 10 seconds more?
Yeah, please go ahead.
It slipped my mind to say something which I think is important. The agreement that we've come to with China on the border is not unrelated, in the sense that India has been principled and stood its ground. And the Chinese side had been extremely intransigent. And so it is not unrelated that just before a critical US election, there is a meeting of minds and a resolution on that front.
Thank you so much. In fact, I just participated in a TV debate on that issue, and the consensus was that although the disengagement appears to be going well, we must not be complacent. We must be vigilant because of the nature of the adversary that we are dealing with. May I now request Professor Chintamani Mahapatra to share his thoughts?
Namaskar, good evening to all of you. Very distinguished people in the audience, very distinguished speakers on the dais. The theme is American election. This election is going to be unique. After 5th of November, when the election results are out, we will know that there will be an Indian blood in the White House. Either a second lady or the President of the United States of America. If Trump wins, we have the second lady there. And if Kamala Harris wins, there will be a president with Indian blood. Should we be happy about it? As Mr. Panda said, not at all. Both of them are hardcore Americans. They will try to promote American interest. So we need not be too much excited about it, but we must take note of it, right? Now, America is one of the oldest democracies in the world. And democracies around the world always look up to the US for some support, some inspiration on how a democratic country functions. Imagine, although there are 50 states and 1 District of Columbia, roughly about 7 states are going to decide who would be the next president of the United States of America. Roughly about 290,000 people are going to decide. There are 538 members in the Electoral College, which is ultimately going to vote for the president. Roughly about 93 electoral voters are going to decide who will be the next American president. So this is a very unique system. On 5th of November, when the election is going to take place, the ordinary citizen is going to vote, but they are not going to decide who will be the next president of the United States. It is the members of the Electoral College on 15th of December, ultimately, finally, right? So it is an indirect system. As Manish raised some questions about the domestic issues, what are actually the key issues in the election right now, which gives some indication about who may come to power, who may not come to power. As I said, a large number of states have already decided whom to vote for, the red states and the blue states. But in the swing states, you find that the minority votes are going to be really, really important. You have Georgia, a very controversial state. In Georgia, 33% of the voters are African-American voters. Whether those voters are going to vote for Kamala Harris or they're going to vote for Donald Trump, that will have some impact on the outcome of the election. Now, traditionally, African-Americans have been voting for Democratic parties. Last time, 92% of the people voted for Joe Biden. But this time there are news, there are some changes. Section of people are now tending to be supportive of Donald Trump. Then you have a war is going on in West Asia. And see the position of Donald Trump and Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is more sympathetic towards the Palestinian cause, in her statements at least. Ultimately, they will do whatever is good for America, right? Under compulsion of the Israeli lobby, Jewish lobby in the United States. But when Kamala Harris says that I'll try to have a ceasefire as early as possible, I'll try to egg upon Israel, Netanyahu, not to be too harsh on the civilians, and I support wholeheartedly a two-state solution, it rang a bell in the members of the Arab American community there. In one of the swing states, particularly in Michigan, large number of Arab American voters are there. Will they support her or will they not support her? Because on the other side, you see, again, very large number of young Jewish population, particularly the students in the universities who came out on the streets opposing Joe Biden policy towards Israel, opposing what Netanyahu is doing in terms of dealing with the civilian casualties there. Are they going to vote for the person who says, I'm fully with Netanyahu, or vote for the person who is saying, I'll try my best to resolve the issue? We don't know yet. There is another swing state called Nevada. In Nevada, the large number of people from the Hispanic community, they live there. In the post-pandemic economic situation in the US, which made the US economy very turbulent and a lot of inflation. And of course, Joe Biden has been able to restore some jobs, but in Nevada, which is going to play an important role in the outcome of the election, economy is not picking up. Unemployment is very high. So I just gave you some indication about the election scene within the United States and who are going to decide and how things may happen. There is another interesting factor. The main debate are going to be immigration. Now, Donald Trump says, I'm going to pack these fellows and send them back to their own country. The largest ever deportation in American history is going to take place if I enter the White House. Whereas Kamala Harris has a different approach altogether. And as again, Mr. Panda said, there may be so many issues. By and large, both of them will have broad policy consensus. The goals may be similar, but the approach may be slightly different and nuanced, right? So this we have to keep it in our mind. Another major issue, the largest group of voters in the United States happen to be women, largest group. Now, this time there is going to be a referendum on abortion issue. And Kamala Harris' position, you know, she is pro-life. The right to abortion, which a Trump-appointed judge in the Supreme Court altered a verdict, and now debate is going on. Trump is changing his position slightly. He doesn't want to be on the wrong side of the debate. But then Kamala Harris is also doing the same thing. She was opposed to fracking in Pennsylvania, another key state. Anybody who becomes the president, by and large, they win Pennsylvania. In Pennsylvania, Kamala Harris was opposed to fracking. But now, because he's fighting the elections, he's saying, no, I'm not going to oppose fracking. Now, the reason I'm saying how these political leaders, the two main contenders, are changing their position is all because it's they're politically motivated and who is going to win, who's not going to win. In the last comment, of course, we'll have more Q&A. I just want to make some brief observations. In India, all of us know how elections take place. The US, India are two democracies. See the similarities. The language used during the campaign, the kind of words Trump is using. Kamala Harris is a nut. She's not intelligent. She's not fit. Right? Kamala Harris is saying this guy is a fascist. And interestingly, North Carolina happens to be another swing state where the person who is contesting for the post of governor, he says, I am a black Nazi. And he justified slavery while giving interview to a pornographic magazine. Is it going to have an impact or not? But this is really interesting. The language is horrible. Second interesting thing happening this time in the United States is the role of media. For a long time, the mainstream media was playing a role in shaping the opinion and shaping the perception of the people. This time, not. This time, the social media and those individual podcasters who are making podcasts, they are being roped into the campaign issues, and this is a very big change in the US. It has been slowly happening, but this time it is rather too much. Finally, like in India, you have all Bollywood heroes and heroines coming and supporting this candidate, that candidate, this party, that party. This time, lot many celebrities in the US are lining up, one group with Kamala Harris, another group with Donald Trump. And their participation matters because they have millions of followers. That is also going to impact not just the debate on abortion, immigration, health issues, public health issues, and all that, but also this factor. So ultimately, finally, let me explain that when an American voter is going to vote, how his behavior is going to be shaped. Not by this big debate taking place. Because one voter who goes to cast his vote may be an African American, may be a rich African American, may not be from the South, and that person may be highly educated. So one individual has multiple roles, and it is not easy to find out all women are going to vote for Kamala Harris because she is pro-life. Not necessarily true. There are many women voters who are going to support Donald Trump, even if his position on abortion rights are totally different. So let us not go by the opinion polls, who is winning, who is losing, 50-50 and all that. But finally, again, it's a very funny system that the one who gets larger number of popular votes across the United States may not win the election because of the electoral college system. This is what happened when Hillary Clinton contested. She got 3 million more votes and lost the election. Right? So let us keep our fingers crossed and see how things are going to happen. Ashokji, I'm just trying to preempt you. During a conversation, you made a very interesting point. Right now, don't think about who is going to win the next election. Kaun banega Rashtrapati? Right now, what is important, what may happen if Trump wins? Will there be democracy? Will there be chaos? Democracy is in danger is part of the debate. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad you ended with that point, which a lot of Indians are not aware of, that in United States, you can win the popular vote and you can lose the election if you don't have enough in the electoral. And actually, you can also in India too. Yeah. I would request Mr. Ashok Malik to speak and give us his perspective on this most interesting, highly polarized election.
Thank you, Chair. Greetings to my fellow panelists and to all of you in the audience. After two distinguished speakers who've given us a tour of the horizon, I just want to make 6 very quick points. One, in the past week, as the Clintons and then President Obama, the Obamas actually came out to campaign in a big way for Kamala Harris, a friend who met me over a drink said, only half jokingly, this seems like Obama's 4th campaign rather than Harris's 1st campaign. Of course, that's not accurate because the battle for the presidency is between Harris and Trump. But in a sense, he had a point because you're capturing America in a period, in a 2-decade period perhaps, which is very unusual in the life of that great country and democracy. And if we are to understand what America means for us as Indians, as citizens of the world, we need to understand the internal dynamics and forces at play in America. The past 20-odd years have, or especially the period after the 2008 financial crisis, has been an enormously turbulent moment for that country and that society. And in a sense, President Obama and President Trump are emblematic of it. They are perhaps the 2 most polarizing politicians in America in the 21st century. Now, I'm not trying to compare them. I'm not trying to embrace one or criticize the other. I'm just talking of them as political phenomena. Now, and in a sense, President Harris or Vice President Harris comes from clearly the Obama school, and she's ranged against Trump. Now, is this right-wing versus left-wing? Is this a battle between monochromatic America and a cultural mosaic called America? That's one way of looking at it. The complexity is much, much greater. This is the confused response of a country that is faced with immense economic dislocation following the failure of the globalization model and the hollowing out of the American economy and manufacturing. So that has led to turbulence over the past 20 years. It's led to the same voter groups, especially working class whites, voting for Obama, voting for Trump, voting for Biden in 2020, looking for answers in a world which has completely changed for them. Which is why when 3 of the previous speakers, Ambassador Mukherjee and Mr. Panda and Professor Mahapatra, said that in actual policy making, the differences may not be that sharp. They all had a point. I'll give you two examples. I was in America. I travel to America every 3 months. That's the nature of my work. And thankfully, I travel outside Washington as well. When I traveled to America earlier this summer, I traveled through the Midwest. I traveled to St. Louis after about 23 years. I traveled through Illinois, and I traveled through Texas, which is in the South, of course. And my sense was Trump was not more popular than 4 years ago. Personally, he was not more popular. But Trump's issues had much greater traction. They had become almost a common sense in America. One, immigration. Second, a certain pushback against extreme wokeism. The number of people who spoke about common bathrooms or their antipathy to common bathrooms being a voting issue in a national election struck me, was bewildering. But yet, people were talking about it. And third, of course, inflation. Not so much the broader economy, but inflation in particular. And this is reflected in even the fact that African-American men, who you would expect would be flocking to the Harris camp, are not. And President Obama specifically mentioned them and said, Black and African-American men have to come out and vote for us Democrats. But they're not. Because they feel most vulnerable to immigration from across the southern border. It's their jobs which are the first to go. It's their employment prospects that are the first to go. And some of them are looking towards Trump. Maybe a small number are, but even that small number could completely swing the election. Second, on protectionism, a consensus on tariffs, how high those tariffs are is another matter. On industrial policy, on a skepticism about free trade, again, that's a new consensus in America. Trump may reflect it in one way. Harris may speak about it in another way. Biden spoke about it strategically as part of competition vis-a-vis China. But the fact is that policy is now set. It's not going to change. There could be some turbulence here and there, but the basics of the policy are not going to change. Coming to the key foreign policy issues, first, the Indo-Pacific, which concerns us the most. I would imagine changes in Indo-Pacific policy are the least likely. I'm not saying they're completely ruled out. There will be some changes, there will be some nuances which will change, but they are probably the least likely. Because anyone who comes to office in America is probably going to use the competition vis-a-vis China, the contest vis-a-vis China for the 21st century, as the Americans put it, as a means to unify Congress, unify Americans, broaden his base. Biden did it. Trump, if he comes to office, will no doubt do it. Harris, if she comes to office, will continue the Biden policy. So on the Indo-Pacific, on finding common ground with India on some way or the other, I think there is a very high probability, irrespective of who comes to office. Of course, there will be nuances and rhetoric which will change. There is the State Department to deal with. In the case of the Biden presidency, we were fortunate that the State Department, which could be problematic, was often overruled by the National Security Council and the White House. We do hope that continues in the next presidency, whoever becomes president. Then you come to Europe and the Ukraine war. The two are related, but they're also separate. Europe is very worried about a Trump presidency because Trump has said he will not make the investments in European security, which the US has made since the end of the Second World War. Biden had worked very hard to unite the West, especially after the Ukraine war. That unity will certainly be threatened if Trump comes to office. And it will open up spaces for China in Europe. It will also open up spaces for India and Europe as a counterfoil. People have spoken about anticipating the US election. I think what you saw with the German Chancellor's visit to India was also an anticipation of both a possible Trump presidency and China grabbing more strategic opportunity in case that happens in Europe. Then the Germans reaching out to India and saying, can you partner us? In terms of the Ukraine war, frankly, there is fatigue over the Ukraine war. And that fatigue will be reflected in putting some pressure on Zelensky to end the war, to take some security guarantee, to take some economic package and freeze the conflict, irrespective of who comes to office. I don't think Trump will walk away from the war on day one. I think he, like Harris, like any American president, will seek to extract a price from Putin, to give Putin an off-ramp. And that price could be, what can you do to create distance between yourselves and the Chinese? Will that succeed? I don't know. But I don't think Trump is going to simply walk into the White House and end the war the next morning. He will use it to extract a price. Finally, on India. India's relationship with the US is multifactorial. It's so big, we do so many things with them. We will find common ground with any president. Prime Minister Modi found common ground with President Obama, who embraced and created the Paris Accord with him. He found common ground with President Trump, who tore up Paris. He found common ground with President Biden, who was as different from Trump as can be. No doubt he will find common ground with the next president as well. And to be honest, any Indian Prime Minister, any strategically minded Indian Prime Minister would do the same. Because we simply do so much with America, we will find common ground with any American president's priorities, and where those priorities differ from ours, we will find other institutions in America, academic institutions, business institutions, state administrations, international foundations to work with. So irrespective of who is in the White House, we will have a very rich agenda with America. However, the politics of Washington is now clearly broken. Even irrespective of who comes to office on November 5th, if there is a result on November 5th, it is very unlikely the president will control both houses and the White House. Very unlikely. Which means the internecine battles of Washington will be reflected in policy towards the rest of the world. What this also means is the key constituencies in states become very important. Our diplomacy has over the years invested heavily in Washington, in congressional engagement in Washington. It has also maintained a steady stream of consulates which have been growing. I believe our diplomacy will now have to balance its excellent work in Washington with even greater engagement in an even greater number of consulates. America is federalizing in a manner we don't quite realize. Even its foreign policy is federalizing. I'd like to stop there.
Thank you very much for that perspective. Fortunately, our keynote speaker has got another 10 minutes for us. So I would first invite questions, if any, addressed to him. And I would also take other questions a little later. The floor is open and we have mics, so please identify yourself. We'll take 3 questions at a time. Please.
Yeah, Mr. Panda, my name is Dr. Sarojit Dodeja. This ongoing election, I think Elon Musk is playing its own role. Elon Musk. So I think first time this type of tycoon having an influence on this election, and he is not only behind the scene, in front, he is paying so much money, $1 million to each voter. It's just a bribe, nothing but. And last time our Prime Minister was there in Texas, and
please
he
make
tried.
it short because you have very little time. I have to take more questions.
So recently we have seen the immigration policies. They have sent back Indians, illegal migrants, and that made trade policy and AI policy will be having what extent to India. Thank you.
Thank you. Next question, please.
Yeah, my name is Arun Gaggar. I'm a mechanical engineer by profession. I just want to say that climate change is threatening the whole world. And Donald Trump has made it clear that he does not want to put any money on climate change by USA. So in case if he wins the election, what is going to happen on that climate change aspect?
Thank you so much. Is there a third question? Yes. Young man, you look like a JNU student. Are you from JNU?
No, ma'am. I am from DU.
Okay, DU. That's my alma mater.
Jai Jagannath, sir. Sir, I want to ask that in a recent few years, 8 to 9 years.
Naam bataiye pehle.
Myself, Avi. I am from Atmaram Sanatan Dharma College, DU. Sir, as far as we look in last 8 to 9 year in a US, India became a priority for any leader, either it is a Trump or Democrats. Sir, in why India became priority in last few years? Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. First, Dr. Saab, factually, billionaires have been playing a big role in US politics for a couple of centuries. If you look at what is called the Gilded Age, from the late 19th century till the till 1920s, 50-year period, they had a huge role. Even if you look at the last 20 years, and on both sides, by the way, George Soros, for instance, is a very strong supporter of the Democrats and has spent literally hundreds of millions of dollars in supporting what are called liberal causes, media and other. And if you look at some of the billionaires that are in the tech sector, they have, Bill Gates has just donated $50 million to the Harris campaign. About Elon Musk's, this $1 million lottery scheme, that's a very interesting point you have raised, because this is unusual and it is being challenged by the Justice Department, because they have certain rules regarding paying people for registering to vote. But there's a very interesting article in this week's Economist, and it shows clearly he has done his homework, because there is no restriction even with the payout for signing up as an activist to take forward a particular. So you have so many referendums in the US, you have so many resolutions where millions of people sign and they take it up. So whether it is illegal or not will be, I suppose, left to the courts. But this is a fact of life in their system. And as I said, it happens on both sides. As long as it is transparent, as long as we see what is going on, it's better for democracy. The US courts have also ruled in the last 10 or 15 years, giving much more scope for donations which don't meet the level of transparency which used to be the case earlier in what are called the super PACs. Next, Dagar Saab, you had a question on climate change. The Republicans generally, and this is the point that Ashok Malik was making, because globalization has actually hurt many tens of millions of Americans. And in many cases, if you look at some of their policies, it is not just protectionism in the old way. It is, there is some rationale to the point that the Trump campaign is making about not giving up its energy independence. One of the ways they have moved away from their energy dependence on the Middle East, and which impacted their policies heavily, was because of two technologies. One was fracking and one was shale. And so it's a geopolitical and a strategic issue for them. But the fact that Elon Musk is such a big supporter of Trump means that he's not going to be totally anti, for example, EVs. Yes, he is incentivizing with strong talk the Detroit motor industry, saying that don't take your plants to Mexico, otherwise I'll put 35% duty. But that these are tactical moves. On an overall strategic move, while he will keep supporting things like fracking and shale and other things which climate activists are often opposed to, there's no indication that he will rabidly oppose new technologies, but we'll have to see how it pans out. And Abhi, it's, as I made my comments earlier, it's not just the last 8-9 years. I've been in Parliament, with only exception of last term, since 2000. So 19 years out of 24 years. And I've been going to the US on these track 2 delegations since 2001. And I saw a very big shift in 2000. I'll tell you what I saw. Already by 2001, the sanctions had been lifted and there was much more positivity. Dehyphenation was being talked about. India was being wooed to take a stand on the Iraq war. But we used to see US captains of industry and big opinion makers batting for China. They used to criticize us at every track 2 discussion saying, you are too slow, your policy changes take too much time, China is very easy, they take these decisions quickly. But around 2009 or 10, I first started hearing huge criticism of China by American lawmakers, by senators, by congressmen and women, and by big industrial leaders and billionaires, because they had started having the experience where, because there are no laws in China, the law is whatever they decide. So they started, stealing their copyrights, stealing their intellectual property rights. Somebody had spent huge amounts of money to set up a plant for something, and suddenly you see an identical plant opening across the road with stolen technology, with your people and all of that. And so for at least now 14, 15 years, I've been seeing there is a terrible compulsion in the US. I mean, they've realized that they've created this monster, if you will. The rules by which China has grown to become the second largest economy are the very rules that it no longer wants to follow, of free passage of ships and things like that. That doesn't mean that there's a autopilot path for India to be the favored country. Every country has its national interests, and even with friends, it's not always going to be fully aligned. As long as there are large alignments of policy, and there will be between democracies, there will always be pretty good alignments of policy, we'll have to tolerate some misalignments, and we have the confidence that we can deal with it. With that, I will have to excuse myself.
Thank you so much, and we really appreciate your staying on for another 15 minutes. Thank you so much, and I'll request one of my colleagues to see you off. Sandeep, can you just... So we have time for another 3 questions before we end the discussion. So come on, ladies. I don't see any ladies here. Only he doesn't look like a lady to me. Please give him the mic. After that, I'm going to give the mic to ladies. Please prepare yourselves. I'm going to give you the floor. You have the first question.
Thank you, ma'am. I am Pankaj Fanse, PhD candidate at JNU. Though I'm not looking like a lady, but my question is about ladies. As Professor Mahapatra pointed out, there has been, the language has been changed in election, especially when it comes to Trump. So we have seen there is a lot of wokeism, a lot of, we can say, misogynist statement from the Trump and their supporters. And at the same time, I have seen that during the Indian elections also, we have seen many misogynist comments about the women candidates, their character assassination, and even with the AI technique, deep fake technique, those trends are increasing. So is it really something that neoliberalism has failed to deliver some concrete output, and that's why it has become a competition for character assassination and identity and counter identity building? So thank you.
So we'll take the next question. Is there anyone? Any lady? If there are no ladies, then I'll give it to this gentleman. But we'll have to ask you next time to bring some lady students from JNU. Aapke students, last time also when we had an event, there was only one lady who took the floor, and she was not from JNU, she was from my college, Miranda House. I remember that.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Sachin, and I'm from Kalinga Institute of Indo-Pacific Studies. So I have a question regarding the impact on India. Both the candidates have there's a bipartisan consensus on India, that's true. But the Trump policy, especially regarding tariffs and the sanctions on the different products, are quite on the extreme. And it's not just with India, but because we are centered on India only, how the Trump policy will likely have an effect if he comes to power. And also, even if he doesn't come to power, what is the overall administration thinking about the issue?
Thank you. Last question of the evening.
I'm Subhrangshu from JNU. I asked this question to Chintamani sir when he was in our center, European Center, but I'm just asking it for the other panelists. What do you see the difference between Trump 1.0 and 2.0? Will there be any difference? Because we have seen some podcasts where we see some sort of moderation, or he has gained some experience, or he has seemed to understand the politics better. So do you think that there's going to be any policies change or attitude change between 1.0 and 2.0? That's it.
Thank you. I'll give the floor to my fellow panelists here. I'd just like to make one comment about attacking women candidates, character assassination, and to say that it has nothing to do with the United States. This is a phenomenon worldwide which men use to bring down women candidates. This is why women are used as weapons of war. This is why the United Nations has brought out a convention about not using women as weapons of war. This is something which the global community needs to combat. It is certainly a shame that it's happening in the United States, but please don't think that the Americans are famous for giving equality to women. It took a very long time for American women to get equal pay for equal work. It took an even longer time for the Swiss women, through a referendum just 15 years ago, to get equal pay for equal work. I'll give the floor now to my fellow panelists. Thank you.
You know, the language is not just against women, it's not just misogynist. When somebody says the Puerto Ricans are garbage, can you really take it? And when Hillary Clinton, also very hard-hitting, saying that this is a convicted felon. I have been a prosecutor. Very strong language, right? Robinson, who is contesting for president, saying that I am a black Nazi, so proudly he's saying that. So in that context, I was saying that the use of language is not moderate. It is really extreme, this time most extreme. Secondly, about Trump 1 and Trump 2. When Trump became the president in 2016, nobody, including Trump himself, knew that he would become the president. So everything was in total darkness. He was not prepared at all. But this time, large number of think tanks are writing notes for him already. The Project 25, which is a very, very, powerful document. Trump says that I have not even read it. I'm not going to follow it. He is going to follow it. Trump has made about 142 promises. Once I become the president, I'll do ABCD. He perceives a real threat from the domestic side, internal security threats, and I'm going to punish them. Very openly he's saying that, right? So Trump 2 is going to be much different, very well organized. They planned the transition. They're going to go after even the deep state, including FBI. They're going to punish people. So they have a plan, right? So it is going to be drastically different. Even on foreign policy matters, it is going to be different, much different. About this India thing, on India, see, I don't know, but most of the panelists have already talked about India. Whoever may occupy the Oval Office in the White House, India will take care of its interest in its own way. There will be difference on very many issues, including the religious freedom reports and things like that. Those things will be there. But the Indo-US strategic partnership, which has adopted a positive upward trajectory since 2000, Bill Clinton's budget, is going to stay. It is not going to be derailed whether Trump comes to power or Kamala Harris. Kamala Harris is not going to say that I'm an Indian origin person, so I'm going to do a lot of things for India. No way. Because if she does that, she will be targeted, right? Donald Trump, he likes our prime minister. Even now, he made a statement. So he knows how to deal with strong leaders. So I don't think he's going to derail relationship with India, although the 10% tariff that he's promising to impose on every country, that will create political economic problem around the globe. And if he really enhances tariff on China by 60%, as he said once, it is going to create a lot of economic turbulence that will have indirect impact on India. How he's going to treat Pakistan and Afghanistan are the big issues. We have to think very hard about it. Right? So we have to protect our own interest and try to make friendship with them.
Thank you. Mr. Malik, would you like to say something?
I'll just take 2 minutes. Both your questions were presuming Trump got elected. If he gets elected, as Professor Mahapatra said, his focus will be domestic. This could be challenging. It could also be an opportunity, to be honest, because the first Trump presidency did not make many appointments, including diplomatic and State Department appointments, for a very long time. This time, a list is ready, from what we understand, and the appointments will come much faster, which means people will be in place much faster. Now, there could be challenges with those people, but the very fact that those people are in office could also help. And yes, as Professor Mahapatra said, his focus will be very domestic, going after supposed domestic adversaries. In terms of Trump's economic policy, look, if he imposes tariffs, his primary opponent or target will be China, but we will not be unaffected. Even last time, trade was an issue which caused problems between Trump's trade negotiators and Indian trade negotiators. Both of whom are very difficult to negotiate with, to be honest with you. I mean, if the Indian trade negotiators are not easy, US trade negotiators are not easy either. However, if you look at what India needs to protect from the Biden presidency, it is the technology arrangements we've come to and the technology partnerships we've come to with the US. I suspect we will prioritize protecting those. If that means making trade concessions to Trump for commodities or products that matter to him, such as Harley-Davidson, I think we'll do it. Because more than market access, market access concessions is the technology partnership which we really value at this stage.
Thank you very much. I think we've come to the end, but I'd request Dr. Manish to please give us his concluding comments, and then we can wrap up. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think it was a fantastic session, and the questions which I sort of imagined were answered brilliantly by each of the speakers here, including the Chair. And one thing I think we all need to get it right, that there is a very strong bipartisan support for stronger US-India ties, which all the panelists talked about. So if going back to, Clinton, Bush, just look at each of those presidencies, and we really see each of them putting in personal political capital to really take the relations into high gear. And the last point is, obviously, as India rises and rises under Prime Minister Modi, from being the 5th largest economy and now to the 3rd largest economy, definitely no US administration, let it be Kamala Harris or Trump, can really ignore India. So I think that is where let's leave it there. And thank you very much to have you all today, and wish you all a very happy Diwali in advance. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, and a very happy Diwali to everyone here. Thank you.